Okay guys, so we had a rainy day today at school, and I wanted to make sure that you guys still had the opportunity to review story elements, as I said we are going to do today in class. So let's begin. Story elements are elements or parts of the stories that we read, listen to, or watch. For example, Cinderella has story elements, both the movie and the written story, and also our reading circle books like Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, Ragweed, James and the Giant Peach, Hatchet, all have story elements, as does Out of the Dust, the poetry book that we're reading during our double periods. But what are these story elements? One way that we can figure out what the story elements are is by remembering to ask ourselves these three questions. First of all, what happens in this story? Next, who is in this story? Third, where and when does this story take place? Okay, so if you noticed, you can also use the 5+1 W's to figure out what story elements are. So what happens in this story? Does anyone remember what we call this story element? Think to yourself for a second, the plot. Okay, who is in the story? Who are the blank that we see or hear about in the story? Think to yourself, the characters. Okay, next, where and when does this story take place? Think to yourself, what could this be called? The setting. Okay, so these are the three categories or groups of story elements that we have to remember. But there are some details that we also have to think about. Let's return up here to what happens in this story. The plot. The plot is the sequence of events that happens in a story, or the sequence of events that unfold in a story as you read it. So there are three main parts to a story: the beginning, the middle, not Middlebury College where I went to school, and the end. And in the beginning, middle, and end, particular things happen. And to remember these, we can also ask ourselves questions. First off, what is wrong in this story? In the middle, what is the most exciting thing or event in this story? And at the end, how do things become right? Or how is the problem solved? That gives us a hint as to what this first question is. Does anyone remember? We call it the, and I'm going to make this red because it's the problem. The problem, or as you may have heard before, the conflict in a story is what's wrong with the story. What's wrong with the characters' lives? What's wrong, or what happens to the characters that needs to be solved? Okay, the next thing, and I'm going to make this orange because it's the most exciting part of the story, which is called the what? Think? Good. The climax. The climax happens in the middle of the story and is usually the most exciting part. Now, to end this little lesson, let's think about what the end of a story is. Things become right, or the problem is solved. Or, as we could say it differently, there is a resolution to this story. The resolution is how the problem is solved, or how the thing that is wrong becomes right. Okay, so to give us an example of how these story elements occur in different stories that we've read, in the next video, we're going to talk about how we can apply these different elements to Out of the Dust, which we've been reading as a class. Okay, thanks for listening.